name's JDuran, and this is my fourth speech, and this is my audience. Fifth speech, sixth speech.
And then
It's titled Teenage Latina Pregnancy. So, Que Dios me salve Maria are the words of a young Latina girl who has just found out that she's pregnant. So in this speech, we're going to be talking about how Hispanics face teenage pregnancy, what kind of harmful repercussions that come with that, the barriers that need to be overcome in order to reach a solution. And so my name is JDuran, and I'm a native to McAllen, Texas, and which is commonly known as the Rio Grande Valley, which is on the border. And so on October in 2011, Martha Hernandez, who's a journalist for The Monitor, which is the local newspaper, published an article called Experts, Education, Key to Dropping High Latina Teenage Pregnancy Rate, where she basically publicly acknowledges and discusses the issue of teenage pregnancy within our community. She also quotes Janice B. Feldman, who was the Associate Social Work Professor for the University of Texas Pan American, which is a local university within the region, who states, Latina teens of Mexican origin have the highest rate of teenage pregnancy in the Rio Grande Valley, in Texas, and in the whole country, which she announced at the Rio Grande Valley Teenage Pregnancy Prevention Coalition Conference this year. So now that we've established that there's a problem locally, there also happens to be data nationally, which is pretty intriguing. And according to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who published the article, U.S. Teenage Pregnancies, Births and Abortion National and State Trends, and Trends by Race and Ethnicity that conducted the research through the Guttmacher Institute, apparently 12.5% of teenage births are Hispanic, which trumps the 12.3% of blacks and the 5.2% of non-whites. So although in other statistics by Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Rate, who published the article Vital Signs Teenage Pregnancy in the United States 1991 to 2009, published in 2011, basically their data states that teen birth rates in the U.S. declined, but remain high, especially among blacks and Hispanic teens in the southern states. Now, Vicente Buyamo Ramos, who is the director of the doctoral program at NYU in social work, who also is the founder of the co-founder and director of the Center for Latino Adolescents and Family Health, states that it is also true that we have made an important sort of progress, but we still have the highest pregnancy rate amongst developed countries. So although there's been somewhat of a decline, it's still very much a problem. So in addition to establishing that teenage pregnancy is a problem, it also has harmful repercussions, and specifically we're going to look at education, health, and the civic sector. And so the ways, this isn't a surprise to anyone, but the ways that teenage girls is affected, sometimes their bodies aren't fully developed and they're bearing babies, but one of the more prevalent health concerns with teenage pregnancies is the contraction of STDs, because if you're being promiscuous, then you're probably also going to contract an STD, and that's no bueno. See here is my STD slide with a man of herpes on his mouth, and it's just not a good disease to have. So according to the Journal of Women's Health, who published an article titled Pregnancy Test Taking in 2003, basically they took data from an oral contraceptive study of 1,115 women, and basically they found that 95% of them had an STD. So that's just a sample, but it's representative of the relationship. And so another factor that produces harmful repercussions that teenage Latinas face is education. Most girls, once they become pregnant, are forced to drop out, as evidenced by the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, who published the article Prevent Teenage Pregnancy is Critical to School Completion, published in 2012, where it states that 30% of all teenage girls who drop out of school are related to parenting or teenage pregnancy. And amongst those, 36% are Hispanic. And so, another factor that teenage Latinas face in the civic sector are basically they become a health problem, and essentially they become a health burden for the public sector, as evidenced by the same vital signs published in 2011, where it states that implications for public health practice, teen childbearing is associated with adverse consequences for mothers and their children and impose high public sector costs. So teenage pregnancy isn't just a personal doesn't just have personal ramifications of STDs and lack of education, but it also has a civic burden that it develops. Not to mention the fact that it instills the poverty cycle, making it all the whole harder for everyone to prevent teenage pregnancy. And so, furthermore, as a result of identifying the problem, let's examine the barriers that keep Latina teenage pregnancy a problem. So basically, why Latinas are getting pregnant is because their parents aren't parenting them about sexual education, which Vital Signs Teen Pregnancy, published in 2011, says that 20% of females and 31% of males had not received any kind of sexual education from their parents at all during the years of 2006, 2078. 20% of those teens stated that their parents never talked to them about sex. And so, another thing that comes up via the social cultural determinants of teenage childbearing among Latinas in California, published by Maternal and Child Health Journal, suggests that parents are actually have lack a level of education, and they found that people with parents of lack of education, specifically Latinas, are more likely to be pregnant. And so parents aren't educated, the Latinas aren't educated, and then they also surprisingly found that speaking Spanish correlates to more positively for being at risk for becoming pregnant as a teenage Latina. And so this all points to communication barriers that are happening within the community. And so, the lack of education, then furthermore, the lack of education beckons for a solution. And so, according to the CDC, Division of Reproductive Health and the National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, the stats they published in 2011 says prevention of teenage pregnancy requires evidence-based sex education, which basically says that I'm right in stating that we need to educate these people. And part of what the CDC has mentioned, now if you remember I said earlier that nationally teenage births have gone down, but they're still happening. Well, basically the CDC combats that with saying education is working, but we need to bridge the gaps and meet those needs to further increase the decrease in teenage pregnancy. So, according to the CDC, during the 2006-2008 period, 65% of female teens and 53% of male teens received formal sex education that covered saying no to sex and provided information on methods of birth control. Now, so overall, resulting from that statistic, there's been a national 7% decrease in teen births. So we need the parents to be educated, and so these statistics provide that education is working, but the disadvantage is how are we going to better reach these girls? And so my expert, Graham Rutledge, talks about how the nonprofit he works for called Online for Life is now developing new strategies to target young girls online. So Online for Life is a nonprofit organization that targets young women at risk for abortions, and so they're using those same technologies, strategies that they're learning in that environment, and that can be used to bridge the gap between young teenage girls and educating Latinas. So basically, new strategies are being developed for using the internet to meet that need. So in conclusion, teenage pregnancy amongst Latinas is a real issue with real effects considering the health, civic sector, and education ramifications. And it can be combated through further developing targeting, using the internet to provide sex education. So, in the words of Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent teenage pregnancy. Who will you educate today? Thank you.